Good morning. I'm reading from The Time Is Now, A Call to Uncommon Courage by Joan Chittister. She is a radical Catholic nun with a spiritual retreat kind of a place in Erie, Pennsylvania. Heavily edited to fit the time, I hope. Chapter 13, Proclamation. The answer to the question of who is called to proclaim truth in a silent generation is an easy one. We all are. There is no part of following Jesus the prophet, of living the Gospels from which any of us are exempt. Jesus said, "God has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed," and then quite clearly, "Follow me." The truth is that every period in the history of spirituality has been in response to a great growing gap between life as it is and life as God wants it to be. In each new age, disciples emerged to meet the signs of the times. Monasticism was a response to the breakdown of society after the fall of Rome. Then, with the collapse of civil leadership, monasteries became the center of civic order. Mendicants, those who lived and worked among the wandering poor, made the creeping disease of poverty impossible to ignore. Great prophetic figures from the 17th to the 20th century confronted the multiple needs of the fast-growing urban world. They formed groups together that were committed to care for the whole segments of society who are now displaced, jobless, and reduced to the squalor of the newly developing cities. Together, they began to treat the wounds of society. They began schools for the poor, for girls, for immigrants. They opened hospitals in the hinterlands and nursed on the battlefields. They built orphanages and old folks' homes. All of them were great movements of charity and justice. The needs of God's people today are no less pressing, no more acceptable than they ever were before. Destitute immigrants languish on our borders begging for help. They risk their lives, their families, and even their children to live a decent and dignified life. In the United States, not one state in the Union offers a two-bedroom apartment cheaply enough for families who earn a minimum wage to live in. Which is why, of course, so many young families live in their cars these days, waiting to hear a prophet's cry on their behalf. It is our task as individuals, as intentional groups, wherever we are on the social spectrum, to shine a light on their lives and to insist that others see it too. It is the task of each of us to be their voice until they can be heard themselves. It's the individual prophet's task, whatever we do and wherever we are, to point out their absence in society, their needs and the inequities they bear. It is our task to give them hope, to give them possibility, and to help the outcasts fit in. The prophetic institutions of the past did their job well. They became part of a service system that raised one generation of immigrants after another to become part of a pluralistic world. Over time, the education and healthcare systems became mainstream. There was a price to be paid for being mainstream. Oh, sorry. There was a price to be paid for being mainstream. We use that word to define those who are neither too conservative nor too liberal, too far right or too much left to be able to be heard. They're safe. They're in line with what the system believes is enough for these needy. But the truth is that prophets are never mainstream. I would prefer that you be hot or cold, Jesus says, rather than tepid. Prophets see what still isn't happening and dim the world until it does. Prophets are not in between. They're the other half of Christianity, the forgotten half, the spirituality. They see what's missing in the world around them, and they set out to see that the world supplies it for those who need it most. They value other ends in life than the ends toward which most of the world strains, for too much wealth, too much power, and too much distance from the dailiness of the daily. And then a reflection. The prophet in this day, facing a world where rugged individualism reigns and those who can't make it on their own are easily forgotten, now must do more than simply serve. They must lead this world beyond its present divisions of race and gender, of national identity and economic class. Yes, the prophet is always out of step with the average response to pain or want or loss of operation or oppression. They're always disturbingly different, always stirring up the consciousness, always confronting a world that obstructs them, always on a path toward the kingdom rather than the palace. The call today is for all of us to realize that the prophetic tradition has been handed on to each of us to reclaim. The world needs all of us, each of us now, to take our place with Jesus on the road from Galilee to Jerusalem so that no one's needs and no one's pain is overlooked on the way. One last thing, she quotes at the end Mary Lambert. When you're 17 in the suburbs and you know only 3 gay people, holding hands with your girlfriend is a proclamation.